Hi, I'm Clinton Jones, Michigan State University College Hall of Fame in football and track and field, and also National College Football Hall of Fame. We were national champions in 1965 and 1966. You're watching Duffy Doherty's Milestone Minutes with Tom Shanahan. Go Green!
This is Spartan Stadium in East Lansing, Michigan. And a capacity crowd of some 76,000 will move into the stadium in the next couple of minutes, most of them already here, as you can see, for they are coming today to watch one of the classics in collegiate football, the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame and the Spartans of Michigan State.
Hi, welcome to Duffy's Milestone Minutes. I'm Tom Shanahan, your host, and we have two great guests from the 1966 Game of the Century, as well as from Detroit Catholic school teams. We have Pat Gallinaw, second team All Big Ten, academic All American. Pat, give us a wave.
Yep, there, we're here.
And then we have George Gedeke, second team All American, third round draft pick of the Denver Broncos, played 6 years in the NFL. I think I got that right. And we're going to talk about the 60th anniversary of the 1966 Game of the Century. And although there are some other Games of the Century labels, there's not another one like this for these reasons. On the field that day, 7 first-round draft picks. Counting the senior, junior, and sophomore classes, because remember, freshmen weren't eligible back in those days, 42 draft picks, 33 pro players, 25 All-Americans. In the Heisman Trophy voting, 3 players in the top 10. Nick Eddy was third. Clint Jones was sixth. Terry Hanratty was eighth. And then here's another new fact I came up with. None of the games that have the label of Game of the Century have anywhere near this total. There are now 9 Hall of Famers from that field, with Terry Hanratty, the Notre Dame quarterback, going in December. You have Bubba Smith, George Webster, Clinton Jones, Gene Washington, Alan Page, Jim Lynch, Terry Hanratty, and then are both coaches, Duffy Doherty and Ara Parsegian. So I want you two gentlemen to do the best you can. Try to explain to our younger audience just how big this game was.
Go ahead, Pat.
Okay, I'll give the first try at it. Looking forward to Notre Dame right after we beat Purdue that year. And Notre Dame, I think, beat, was it Oklahoma in South Bend? Not the South Bend, in Norman, Oklahoma. They beat them. It was pretty obvious for the remainder of our schedules that we were going to meet undefeated. And there hadn't been a number 1, number 2 team. And that year, first half of the season, we were number 1 until we went down to Columbus, Ohio, and played Woody Hayes in a pouring rainstorm. And we eked out, I think, a 13-11 victory over Ohio State down there. The same weekend, Notre Dame beat North Carolina State or something like 35-0. And so we traded places. Notre Dame for the rest of the season would be rated number 1. We were number 2. And then it would look like 2 trains on a collision course. Was pretty much certain that we were going to meet it undefeated and winner takes all. So that was the buildup to that game. And we each had 3 full weeks to get ready. And the pressure mounted with each passing week as we got closer and closer to that game. And it was just a feeling that you really could not replicate any place. During that week of the game, I didn't think my feet hit the ground as I walked across campus. So it was really spectacular. George, go ahead.
I think, Pat summed it up pretty well as far as the lead up to that ball game. And, one of my big recollections was we were cruising and when Era got there in 64, we missed out on the last game against Southern Cal for a national championship. And then we had a so-so year the following year. We were 7-2-1. So we had a senior crew, of football players that had, some experience, and we were hungry because we'd been close, but we didn't get the national championship. So we were geeked up and we were prepared for that season. And like Pat said, we beat Oklahoma. We beat Purdue in the first game, and they were a national contender. And then at the build-up, the biggest thing I remember about that game was on Monday, I had butterflies, which, I always had butterflies before a game, but never on a Monday. And I think it had a little bit, obviously a lot to do with the buildup of that game, even though there wasn't, an overflow of media or, of course, social media. You could feel the tension grow. And so it was that was the biggest memory I had, was having butterflies on a Monday before the game. And that had a little bit to do too with my being a Michigander from Detroit and playing against Sparty, because that was always a good, a big contest. So that was it from my standpoint.
Yeah, and part of that buildup, for context, it was a record TV audience, 33 million. And that's out of a population of 195 million. Compare that to the 2025 championship game. TV executives are giddy that they got 30 million out of a population of 340 million. So 1 in 6 Americans were interested in how this game was going to turn out. It was the dawning of the TV age because you also had the new satellite technology from the space race. So it was the first game broadcast live to Hawaii. Michigan State had 3 Hawaiians on the team, but also to the servicemen over in Vietnam. And I remember I wrote a story on the 25th anniversary when I worked at San Diego Union Tribune. Here we are in the 60th. And I got a note from a guy who said he was on a submarine off the Vietnam coast listening to that game. So that's how big it was. But anyways, I've written about how conference expansion has ended a lot of traditional rivalries. And that's true of Michigan State and Notre Dame. They played every year. And in fact, Notre Dame's 4 oldest rivalries are Navy, USC, Purdue, and then Michigan State. And when Notre Dame joined into a ACC agreement, it kind of disrupted their schedule. But Notre Dame's respect for the 1966 game of the century is such that they juggled their schedule in 2016 and 2017 to honor the 50th anniversary. And they're doing it again to honor the 60th anniversary with the game in South Bend in 2026 on September 19th. And then in 2027, they'll go back to Michigan State. Pat and George, you go first, Pat. Just talk about the tradition and the that you grew up with in that game and you participated in, and the intensity.
That I could go on for an hour and a half. I don't think you wanted that long, but as I told you, if you were a Catholic boy and you went to a Catholic school and you were a half good football player, Notre Dame was the one school that just about every Catholic boy wanted to go to. But Notre Dame didn't really recruit me because Joe Koharic, who was the coach at that time, he wanted big linemen. He didn't want little linemen. He came from the pros and he wanted the big, tall linemen. You had to be at least 6'2", and weigh about 240 to even be looked at. So I was only about 5'10", 210. Brad, who was a coach at Austin High School, had recommended me to Notre Dame. I don't even think I got a flying letter, to get that thing from them. But it's been a great, great rivalry, and I will never say anything bad about Notre Dame.
George.
Go ahead.
Yeah, again, I think it was noteworthy that they did make, throw those games into the schedule. I know they make these college schedules out so far in the future that sometimes it's contrary to what, actually should be happening as far as the top teams playing each other. So that was good they did it. But I think the upper management in both schools were always very close and respected each other, and especially the history of that game in '66. They wanted to honor that moving forward. So that was pretty special. But I've got to say, Pat was right about being a Catholic kid. I was one of 12 kids in a good Catholic family. I got a couple brothers that were Christian brothers, a couple sisters that were nuns. So they had a lot to pray for, though I was around. So they they had a lot to pray for, but that was great. But once I got a call from Notre Dame, that was it. I didn't visit any other schools. There were a lot of them that were calling and wanted to, invite me for a visit and so on. But I figured, well, I'm just going with the Notre Dame. That's it. And maybe a little stupid on my part that I didn't have a backup, but that was good. I was going to roll with that. And the other thing too, is Terry Hanratty was very, very much highly recruited by Duffy. And he said it came down to that decision between Michigan State and Notre Dame. And he chose Notre Dame, which we were happy, of course, about that decision. But yeah, it was good that they honor that game, on the anniversaries of those reunions. And it was just a great, wholesome relationship. I've never been
Yeah.
a fan of Michigan. But I've always had a good place in my heart for Sparty and all the good competition that we've had through the years and, to this day.
Yeah, Michigan State was Terry Henry's second choice. Said he loved Duffy, and just like you, George, he said he always roots for Michigan State against Michigan.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, I know in my second book I have a chapter about Dan Devine, who was a Duffy Doherty disciple, and his time at Notre Dame. And Vegas Ferguson played for Devine, All American at Notre Dame. And Vegas told me whenever the Michigan State game was coming up, they knew they were going to be sore on Sunday and Monday. Same for you guys when the game was coming up.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'll jump in here, Pat. That game, and I played 7 years. It was 7 years in the pros, Tom, but that's fine.
Okay.
Who's counting? But that game was the hardest hitting game that I've ever been in, pro and college. And you had Bubba Smith and Charlie Mad Dog Thornhill. I called him the Black Mighty Mouse. He was 5'9", but boy, what a stud! And they had the defensive linemen. Well, Pat was there, of course, but Richardson, Bubba Smith, George Webster, all those guys. But there was some serious hitting going on in that game. And then, obviously, not obviously, but I got knocked out in the first quarter, uh, injured. But that was one serious contest, and I think um, we had peaked for that game, and I know we had Tom Pagna was Era's offensive coordinator, and he was kind of a psychologist, but he had to bring us down a few times because we were getting so high up and loaded for bear that, and as it turned out, it worked the contrary. So he got us more geeked up because of these sessions he had with us to try and tame us down a little bit and get it back up for game time. But it was one of
Yeah.
the more intense games of all time.
Yeah. And as we've touched on here, both you guys were from Detroit Catholic League schools, and you weren't the only ones. Both teams had several Catholic League players from Detroit. Talk about how great the Detroit Catholic League schools were back then. And Regis Cavender was from the Detroit Catholic League and scored Michigan State's touchdown. And then Jim Seymour was from one of the Catholic schools too, right, George?
Yeah, he was from Royal Oak Shrine,
Yes.
and myself from St. David's, which was great. And then we had Jerry Wisney was from U of D. He wasn't a starter, and then I think uh, Sparty had Jim Prisbicki, Joe Prisbicki, and then I think Tony Conti too, right, Pat?
Yep. Tony Conti, Joe Frisbicki was there. There was We were eight. There were eight from the Detroit Catholic League on our roster for the '66
Wow.
game.
Yeah.
8 kids.
We just had three. I mean, it was Wisney, myself, and Seymour from Royal Oak Shrine, and all the Seymour boys. Paul Seymour was all pro, but they were pretty good football players. But I'll tell you, the Catholic League at that time, there were over 100 high schools in the city of Detroit in the 60s. And they were all neighborhood kids, just tough Polacks, Germans, Italians, Irish, whatever, but they were all kind of neighborhood ethnic. I don't want to say ethnic, but they were. I mean, you had the Hamtramck schools with the Pechoric boys, Servite, Pat Gallinaw, St. David's had Mike Mullins, Jim Brisky, myself, Dennis Brisky, myself. There were a lot of good football players, a lot of good athletes coming out of the Catholic League in the 60s. And then, of course, the white flight started in Detroit. So those schools closed. And now I don't think there's but two or three Catholic high schools in the city of Detroit. UD,
Yeah.
I forget a couple more, but that's it. So it really changed over the years as far as that and feeding the and there's still a pretty solid Catholic league with you got the likes of Brother Rice, Orchard Lake St. Mary, UAD, Detroit Catholic Central, and they come up with a lot of great athletes year in and year out and send them on to college. So but it was, I always say it was one of the great sororities and fraternities of all time, the Detroit Catholic League.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, George, that once you got the offer from Notre Dame, you jumped at it. Did Duffy try to recruit you at all?
They probably sent a letter, but I just didn't pay any attention. I
Okay.
wasn't interested in pursuing any more visits. I was bound and determined that it'd be Notre Dame. And again, it was probably stupid, but I didn't have anyone. If Notre Dame hadn't offered me a scholarship, I'd have been out. And I was thinking too that I might just go in the army. But so that's kind of where it was.
Okay, now another question I want to ask about, and this is kind of about the dawn of the TV age and college sports was changing, but there was an old throwback for this game, and this is more of a question for George. In 1966, Notre Dame rode the train from South Bend to Lansing. And the stories I've read, George, you can comment on this as you guys were leaving Indiana and the lower part of Michigan, you saw all kinds of fans lining the train tracks with banners about "Go Irish." And then the deeper you got into Michigan towards Lansing, it switched to Michigan State banners and "Kill Bubba Kill" signs. Talk about that train ride, and I think maybe it'd be a good idea if both schools did that out of respect for history, if they rode the train instead of the bus or flying.
Yeah, well, I doubt they'd fly these days, but yeah, it was pretty special, and it was interesting too, like you say, the temperature changed once we not necessarily crossed the line because there were a lot of southwestern Michiganders that were fans of Notre Dame just because of the proximity. But yeah, they were praising Notre Dame and wishing us luck, and then you get into Michigan and closer to East Lansing, and it was like Hail Mary, full of grace. Notre Dame's in second place, and God knows some of them weren't quite as religious or kosher. And some of them were just flat out, just get out of town, whatever. And it wasn't pretty. But one of the things I remember most of all, Tom and Pat, was regarding the train. Nick Eddy had a bad shoulder. And the week before we played Duke, we beat him 64-0. Nick played like one play. It was the first play from scrimmage. He ran 64 yards for a touchdown, and we ended up beating him 64-0. But Era took him out of the game because of his bad shoulder. So he figured he'd rest him and he'd be ready for Michigan State. But as the train pulled into East Lansing, they put that stoop outside the steps of the train to step on. And I preceded Nick out of the train, and
Uh-huh.
it was removed from the train steps themselves. And I had to adjust to do it, being a great athlete that I was. But Nick couldn't make that adjustment. And then what happened, is he threw his arm up to grab the bar to, stop his fall, and he jerked his shoulder again, and it re-injured his shoulder. There was talk about it being a knee and all that, but it was a shoulder. So that was the thing about the train that was most vivid in my memory as far as when we pulled into East Lansing. And then, of course, well, that was before the game, but we pulled into the stadium and there's Bubba's white Buick Riviera with Bubba on the door. So that kind of got us a little juiced up,
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think I've ever read that explanation for how Nick slipped. That he was reaching back. You just hear that he slipped. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that's right.
interesting.
And
Yeah,
again, you know what I'm talking about. They put that stoop down there,
yeah, sure.
ease your transfer from the steps onto the
Yeah,
ground, but it was not as close as it could have been.
yeah,
Nick,
yeah.
not being as good an athlete as I, he didn't make the passage quite well.
Yeah. And of course, in today's sports world, that would have been all over Twitter, ESPN.
Oh,
Pat, did you guys even know that Nick got hurt at the train station, or what do you remember
Of what? What do I remember? What?
about Nick Eddy getting hurt? Were you guys
Oh,
aware of it?
well, we had one of our great players out of that game too, and very people don't remember this. That Baba Pisa didn't play in that game.
Yeah.
What a great fullback he was. He didn't play in that at all. He never even suited up for that game. And Reggie Cavender was a second string quarterback, second string fullback. He's the one that scored the only touchdown for us. And I remember hearing after the game that Johnny Ray, who was the defensive coordinator for Notre Dame at that time, was actually in tears in the locker room saying that Michigan State scored on us because he had just, I guess, made up his mind that Michigan State could not score on this Notre Dame defense. And we did it. I think I might have been on our second drive that we did it. And he was stunned. They were stunned by it a little bit. And they have a second string fullback, he's the one that scored a touchdown.
Yeah.
Of course, it was the second stringer, Bob Gladio, who scored Notre Dame's only touchdown. I don't think Jim Seymour, who I played against in high school, believe it or not, at Shrine when he was there, caught a single pass that day. And he was a
yeah,
great
it was
receiver.
close to the vest. There were two good defenses. I tell you, I got to look at these stats here, but total points gave up 10 games. We were like shutouts. We had 6 shutouts in 10 games, and it was like 3.8 points a game. Our defense, held the opponents too. And then you're right. I mean, it was that was a great defense with Johnny Ray. We had some studs on that defense. And to go back a little bit too, Pat, you talked about being 5'10" and 205 to Servite. I was surprised when we came back for that reunion. What was that? How many years ago now was that? 5, 6? But whatever it was, the offensive line and Reddy used to give us the raspberries because I think Jerry West was like 5'10", and the guys on the offensive line were kind of smallish. I mean, nothing against them. They were good football players, but Jerry said you guys should have dominated based on, across the line. Most of that offensive line was 5'10". I mean, Joe Prisbicki was an exception, I think. But
He was the biggest lineman, and he only weighed about 245, which was not huge, but it was big for that time. There was space there.
yeah, he was a specimen too. God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, where both teams were huge was on defense. And I want to bring this up. Notre Dame finished the year number one, 9-0-1. Michigan State was number two, 9-0-1. Neither team played in a bowl game in those days because that season because Notre Dame didn't play bowl games until 1969. And then Michigan State, as the two-time Big Ten champ, was barred from returning to the Rose Bowl. So they finished 1-2 in the voting, and Alabama was number three. And Bear Bryant was crying, and he had all of his fans crying, reverse racism, just because of George Wallace, they're voting against Alabama. One thing that Bear Bryant and his sycophants overlooked was that size differential between these two teams. There was a separation between 1 and 2 and 3. For example, Alabama's All-American offensive tackle was 6'1", 202-pound Cecil Dowdy. And as I've written many times, who was going to block Bubba Smith, 6'7", 280, and George Webster, 6'4", 255 for Michigan State? For Notre Dame, who was going to block Alan Page, 6'4", 245? And Jim Lynch, linebacker, 6'1", 235. These guys are all in the College Football Hall of Fame. Uh, both Pat and George comment about how it would have been a complete mismatch for Alabama to play either one of you guys.
Well, anyhow, I always have respect for Alabama, but I think we kind of proved our point a little bit. George and I were part of a delegation that played in the North-South Shrine game. There were 9 members, which is almost 1/3 of the North team between Michigan State and Notre Dame. And of course, we played against a lot of schools from the South that were in bowl games at that particular time. And we dominated. It's hard to tell. You never know from game to game what it's going to be like a thing. But what that game did, it made Bear Bryant go beyond, outreach way outside his territory and start scheduling games with Southern Cal and that, because they were getting enough recognition by playing teams in their own area that weren't in the Southeast Conference. So it did change a little bit the whole perspective of, but I don't. No one can predict what would happen if we played each other there. It's one game to another. But I agree with you, and I think George does too, that we were better football teams personnel-wise than Alabama.
Yeah, George, before you go, let me add in here that Notre Dame had one more game left after the 10-10 tie, and you went out to Los Angeles and beat a top 10 team, USC, 51-0. So Alabama, I think, had about the same type thing in store for them if you'd played.
Yeah. Well, we'd played Oklahoma that year, as Pat mentioned, and one of their defensive ends was like 195 pounds. And they had Granville Liggins, the chocolate cheetah. He was a nose guard at 205 pounds. I mean, and again, size doesn't necessarily, it ain't the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. But regardless, when you're big and a good football player, you're going to kick the shit out of a guy that's small and a good football player, you know?
Yeah. Okay, let's start wrapping it up. And one thing I want to talk about is that there's probably, the other thing unique about the Michigan State Notre Dame rivalry is the respect between these two schools and the players. And a good example of that is the informal reunion at the 2017 game, recognizing the 50th anniversary. George, I think you were there, and Terry Henready made the trip to Spartan Stadium. I think you had a role in organizing that, Pat. You guys all got together and watched the game. I don't think Michigan State would be inviting any Michigan guys to watch the game with them. Talk about the respect and the drive to get that reunion together, and George and Terry making the trip.
Well, I'll go first. Notre Dame was really one of our only what we call national universities. They could recruit coast to coast, north to south, didn't make any difference there. They were known every place they go. Michigan State was primarily a regional power, although we did reach out to Hawaii and California on occasions. But most of our players came from the Midwest, whereas Notre Dame, their roster covered the entire country out there. And so when this game is talked about, there had never been anything like this in the history of televised sports. The last time number 1 and number 2 team had met had been 1946. And believe it or not, it involved Notre Dame and Army, and they played to a 0-0 tie. It was the second game of the season, and that hadn't happened again until 1966, and this was late at the season. And this game was supposed to settle everything, and it terminated settled nothing. But what came out of it it gave all of us a little bit of immortality. I've asked this question to some very talented sports writers, sports broadcasters, who were the 1986 national champs, who were the 1996 national champs. Not one person could name all three of them national champs, not one, but every single one of them knew about the 10-10 tie. So that game gave us a little sliver of immortality, and we've been living with it ever since.
Yeah, that's good. And I'll tell you, just I think a nice story that talks about the camaraderie and a friendship. I mean, I hadn't met a lot of those guys. Of course, I knew Pat, but Jerry West, I just thought he was a sweetheart. I mean, just a really nice guy, tough guy, and all that. We met at the reunion in 2017, like you said, and Jimmy Ray, of course. But the two things that need to be mentioned are how Duffy did so much to integrate college football. And that changed a lot of minds around the country. And a lot of those Southern blacks that had nowhere to go because those state schools wouldn't accept them, Duffy brought them up north and just made a killer program out of them. And they were great athletes and good people. And then the other thing that comes to mind is Pat mentioned the North South Shrine game. We were down there, at Christmas time, which was bizarre down in Miami. That was my first Christmas didn't have snow, but we, it was fun. Bubba and we'd go out and have a cocktail or two, and Bubba was just a stitch. We went into this gay bar one time, and Bubba was just playing with this waiter's mind. He was kind of flirting with him almost. But I just thought it was a stitch how he was carrying on with him. But then again, it was Christmas Eve, and we went in someone's room, and we were singing, a couple Notre Dame guys and a bunch of Michigan State guys. We were singing Christmas carols, drinking a beer and singing Christmas carols in Miami, which I just thought was priceless. And that tells you exactly what you need to know about that relationship, both on and off the field.
Yeah, yeah, I forgot to bring that up. Thanks, George.
Yeah.
I did not know the Bubba story at the gay bar, but as I always tell everyone, everybody has a Bubba story. And so you
Oh,
just
yeah.
proved my
What a
point
character.
again. Okay, well, let's wrap it up. Closing comments from Pat about looking back on that game and being a part of it 60 years later.
Well, it's just something. It was just pure old luck. The game was just an accident of schedules. No one scheduled it with the idea that this was going to be determine a national championship game. We had played Notre Dame basically on and off, most of the time on from 1948 on. And as I said, we had kind of dominated the series after once Frank Leahy retired. And then Notre Dame, would under Ara Parseghian, broke back in 1964 and gave us a good spanking there in South Bend. And then 65, we went back to South Bend and we kind of returned the favor, but not nearly as bad as they gave it to us. And everybody, of course, was looking for the 66 game, but nobody expected it to be of the momentum of the scope that it was. We had over 80,000 people in the stadium that only holds 76,000. I've never had figured that one out yet. How they even allowed that to happen, because that obviously was if there was a fire, they had to activate the stadium. I don't know. There was not an empty seat any place you could find on there, even on the sidelines. So, but just having been a part of that is something that I'll never forget, and I'll treasure that I had the opportunity. And I think George feels more or less the same way.
Yeah, absolutely, Pat. And I think, one of the interesting things too, I played pro football for 7 years. And I would tell people, well, I played with the Broncos in Notre Dame. And the first question they say, well, what happened at Notre Dame? It wasn't the Broncos. It was always Notre Dame. So that
Yeah.
puts it in perspective, of course. But to have two great coaches, Notre Dame had kind of been off the map as far as their notoriety and productivity. But with Arab, boy, we just came back. He was an unbelievable guy, unbelievable coach, and a special human being. And we responded to his leadership. And Duffy was the same. Duffy was a character, great recruiter, but he got good teams going. But that was it. Just those two coaches leading those two programs in that epic battle. It goes on every 5 years. I mean, we're talking with you, Tom, and God knows who would have thought about Pat Gallina or George Gedeke if that game hadn't happened. So it was special, and feel blessed to be a part of it and to continue on. Hopefully, like I said, I'm 80 and married 57 years. We're going down for our 60th, by the way, and it's not the Michigan State weekend because that's a night game, and us old farts need our sleep. So we're going to go the weekend before that to the Rice game. But we've got a lot of people responding, of course, and we'll look forward to celebrating that great relationship with Michigan State.
Time for our younger audience to comprehend how big this game was. 33 million people out of a population of 195 million. President Johnson was not really a sports fan, so he didn't go to the game. But President Kennedy, had he lived past the assassination in Dallas, he loved college football. And also he would have respected Duffy Daugherty for his leadership of college football integration. I believe President Kennedy would have been at that game. As I said before, the four oldest rivalries for Notre Dame are Navy, which is on Notre Dame's schedule again, USC, which is not on the schedule next year, Purdue, and then Michigan State. Not anybody else. Michigan State is number 4. Thanks for joining me, guys.